Thank you for all the work you do on behalf of older adults across Oregon. The Oregon Department of Human Services is preparing to launch a statewide public education campaign to promote reporting of abuse or neglect of an older LGBT adult or violation of their rights and the rights of those living with HIV in long-term care settings. The past few weeks and months have been focused on preparing the strategy for the campaign so that we can get your feedback. This includes potential messaging for the campaign to encourage reporting of abuse, neglect, and rights violations against older LGBT plus adults, including how to report it and what happens after the report is made. More recently, we've been developing a range of options for the creative elements of the campaign. In other words, what it looks like. When you think of the Got Milk campaign, you might picture someone with a milk mustache. When you think of campaigns to prevent forest fires, you probably think of Smokey Bear. A picture of an egg frying in a skillet reminds many of us of a famous public service campaign to prevent drug abuse. As I've said, we've been exploring different options for what this campaign might look like, and we've narrowed the options down to 5. But we want to get that list of options down to 3 so that we can test them in focus groups and surveys to figure out which option will work best. And that's where you come in. We're asking for help from people like you who are on the front lines of this important work and whose input and insights have been so important in identifying the need for this campaign. So, along with the link to this video, we've sent you a PDF showing the 5 different creative concepts that we're considering, and we'd love to get your feedback. The creative concepts in the PDF all look like a poster you might see in a long-term care setting, a library, or a social services office. But they could be adapted in lots of different ways for ads on Facebook or Google, for transit shelters and the sides of buses, for billboards or flyers. When people think of public education campaigns, they often picture dramatic and sometimes even scary imagery. For example, in this context, people might be expecting to see an ad with an older LGBT plus person who has been physically abused with the bruises to show for it. Imagery like that can attract attention in a cluttered communication landscape, but it can also lead people to turn away and not even want to think about the issue or reinforce their sense of helplessness in trying to do anything about it. So you'll see a mix of creative options here, some of which are more focused on the reality of abuse and neglect, and some of which are focused more on the responsibility we as a community have to do something about it. Looking at creative concepts like these can be fun, and we certainly hope you enjoy the opportunity. It can also be tempting to focus on what we like individually. Each of us has our own preferences about photography and illustration styles, about colors or fonts we like or don't like. We're going to ask you to try to focus less on what you like personally and more on what you think would work strategically in meeting the goals for a campaign like this. So I'd urge you to have these questions in mind when you look at each concept. Which of the concepts do you think would be more attention-getting, but not off-putting? Which of the concepts do you think would be better able to convey messaging about abuse or neglect about older LGBT plus adults and about violations of their rights or the rights of someone living with HIV in a long-term care setting? Which concepts might be easier to adapt for older adults that don't identify as LGBT plus? And lastly, which concepts are more likely to motivate someone to take action to report abuse or rights violations against an older LGBT plus adult? As I've said, there are 5 creative options in the PDF. We need to narrow that down to 3 that would be tested in focus groups and surveys with older LGBT plus adults, their families and friends, care providers, mandatory reporters, and others. Then, based on that testing, we'll figure out which creative idea, likely with some modification based on what we hear, to be selected for the public education campaign. To help us narrow from 5 down to 3, after you've had a chance to look at the creative concepts in the PDF, we hope you'll share your thoughts with us about them in a brief SurveyMonkey poll. The link to that survey is in the email you received with the link to this video. Since we're moving really fast to be ready for a launch at the end of March, Stay tuned for more in the weeks to come. If you want to share your input through the survey, please do so by the end of the workday on Tuesday, February 4th. And if you'd like to ask any questions about the concepts or share your thoughts with us directly, the email you received includes a link to a 1-hour video call on Monday afternoon, February 3rd, during which we'll be available to respond to questions from anyone who joins the call. In the meantime, I want to thank you again for the important work you do. We sincerely hope that whatever creative concept is ultimately selected for the campaign will make a valuable contribution to your work. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to hearing your input.